Now we're going to talk about common stock. Every company that gets issued has common stock. Every company that you've ever heard of, if it's a corporation, it has common stock. Now all securities, or at least most securities, have something called par value. It's important to understand when dealing with common stock, par value is utterly meaningless. If the question ever mentions par value, it doesn't actually matter. It is merely trying to distract you. Unless you're taking some advanced accounting, business management, something like that. But none of the series exams is par value on common stock going to matter. In the real world, they're generally like a penny, or in Google's case here, a tenth of a penny. So they're generally very small. It's an accounting method, but you might see it. And you need to know that it is not relevant. It is never going to be needed in any math. It is never going to be part of the answer. It is merely a distraction. Here's another common stock. This one has a value of a penny for the par value. We have DMC, although the company no longer exists. It did have common stock. Here's a copy of one. And then we have the Pepsi-Cola company. This one had a par value of, I think, yep, there it is, 33 1/3 cents. Why? Who knows? It's a counting method for some purpose. We're never going to need it. Common stock, the primary reason to get it is capital appreciation. It is purchased for growth. You try and buy it when it's low, you hold it until it's high, and you sell it later. It comes with voting rights. It has potential dividends. You are an owner. You give a say in the company, how it works. That's the voting rights. You get a share of the profits. That's the potential dividends. It has lowest liquidation claims, as we discussed in the previous chapter, in the previous section. Lowest liquidation claims in bankruptcy, the last to get paid should something happen to the company. They have preemptive rights. They have the right to maintain their proportional ownership. There was a movie several years ago called The Social Network about the history of Facebook, and it shows what Mark Zuckerberg did to his old roommate Eduardo when it came to business. Now, don't worry about how much Mark Zuckerberg may have stabbed him in the back. Last I heard, Eduardo was worth like $7 or $8 billion and living on his own private island. He's fine. But if you watch that movie, you'll see how he actually stabbed Eduardo in the back was through stock and through ownership that did not have preemptive rights. We're going to discuss this in a later chapter, certainly a later section, but a later chapter when we're talking about dilution and anti-dilution. The idea is if there is 10,000 shares of stock in a company, and I own 3,000 of them, 10,000 total, I own 3,000, that means I'm a 30% owner. If, however, suddenly there were 10 million shares of stock and I still only own 3,000, I wouldn't be a 30% owner anymore. My ownership went way down. Preemptive rights on common stock that retail customers purchase has preemptive rights, so they don't have to worry about new stock being issued to dilute their ownership. We will be discussing preemptive rights in several different ways here about the properties of common stock. We're going to discuss it when we talk about the actual derivative called a right, and when we talk about underwriting when it comes to standby underwriting. A round lot, an even lot, a singular lot, is 100 shares. Anything less is called an odd lot. 500 shares is 5 lots. But remember, common stock is purchased for capital appreciation, for growth. It has voting rights, as I mentioned, statutory voting and cumulative voting. There's only those two types of voting. Statutory voting is where you can allocate one vote per share per seat. And that's it. If I have 100 shares, I can vote 100 for seat 1, 100 for 2, 100 for 3. This is going to benefit larger owners, larger proportional owners. Cumulative voting, on the other hand, is where I can allocate my total votes any way and anywhere I see fit, including all for one of the seats. This is going to benefit small owners as it allows us to pool our shares together. Here's how that looks in pictures. With statutory voting, if I have 100 shares, That means I have 100 for seat 1, 100 for 2, 100 for 3, and 100 for 4. Now, don't think of these like high school elections or club elections where the number 1 vote getter is president and 2 is vice president, 3 is treasurer, blah, blah. Each of these directors might have a specific job description, a specific portfolio that they are responsible for. So there are specific people that are running for each of these specific positions. Some people may be running for multiple seats, but normally it's different people for each seat. So if I have 100 shares and I can vote them any way I want, the more shares I have, the more power I have, which is always going to be the case. But with cumulative voting, I can take those 100 shares I divvied up, take all 400 of them now, and put them any way I want, including all for one director. Now, this benefits smaller investors because all of us smaller investors can talk and work together and all vote and all put all of our votes for the same director. Now, we're clearly not going to control the board, but it is going to hopefully let us get at least 1, maybe 2 people on the board that have our interest at heart. Yeah, we're not going to control the board. We're not a large proportional owner, but we're hopefully get at least someone who cares about our point of view. Now, how shares get issued? When common stock is started, when a company wants to raise money by issuing common stock, it has to have a certain number that have been authorized. When a company gets incorporated, in its documentation is a number of shares. The securities guys is a corporation. It has shares as a corporation. They're not publicly traded, but it has shares as a corporation. In this case, let's say that they got 5 million shares authorized. As we're going to see in later sections, later units, many companies issue significantly more than 5 million shares. But let's just, for simplicity here, keep it sort of simple at 5 million. Now, they're going to take some of those, maybe all, but at least some, and they're going to want to issue them. They're going to want to sell them to the public to raise money. In order to do that, they must go through underwriting. That is a process we will discuss later. It uses investment banks, people who are professionally in this. Any given company that's trying to issue shares doesn't professionally issue shares. It's its first time. These banks, these investment banks that function as underwriters, this is all they do. They're really good at it, so they have the information to help make the best decisions and the best offerings. Now, if you notice, not all of the authorized shares were issued. In this case, 2 million were unissued. Why would a company do that? Well, they might keep unissued stock as a way to raise money later without needing to go through the process of updating their corporate charter, without updating their incorporation documents. They can't just sell these. These have not been issued. For them to sell and raise money, they must be issued. They must go through underwriting. But these 2 million, if in the future they want to raise more money, they can just put them through underwriting and sell them to raise money through a subsequent public offering. They're not going to need to go and update all of their documents. Now, once shares have been issued, they're out trading, and anybody can buy them. Now, there's basically 2 sort of people that could buy them that are important. One is everybody else, and the other is the issuer, because the issuer could buy its own stock, in which case it becomes what is called treasury stock. IBM can buy Microsoft stock, Microsoft can buy IBM stock, nothing happens there. But as soon as IBM buys IBM stock, that becomes treasury stock. Now, why would a company want to do this? Well, there's many reasons. Some of us may have heard of companies that offer stock options to certain employees, or just give grants of stock to certain promotions or certain production levels or certain time in the business. Whatever reason, if you've ever heard of stock options or gifts of stock from the company, they had to come from treasury stock. The company could be investing because they think the stock price is going to go up. Now, there are rules for insider trading. They can't just, like, a week before they make a major announcement, go and buy a lot more stock. But they could be doing buyback programs, in which case they're buying 5,000 shares a month, 10,000 shares a month, something like that. It has no voting rights. If they wanted to try and help lower the number of votes, lower the size of their shareholder meeting by chance, maybe. And it has no dividends. That's going to allow them to keep the same annual dividend payment, but actually increase the dividend per share because there's fewer shares getting dividend. or keep the same dividend per share, keeping their shareholders happy, but actually lower the total cost because there's fewer shares getting that same amount of dividends. Anything that's been issued that is not in Treasury is outstanding. Those are shares with the general public or with other companies, just not in Treasury stock. Well, we want to think about these equations down here at least a little bit. We don't want to worry too much about them. We want to figure out where they come from because they make sense if we think about them. Authorized shares. If shares are authorized, they've either been issued or they've been unissued. There are no other options. That means issued plus unissued has to equal authorized. Whereas if the shares have been issued, they're either in Treasury or they're outstanding. So outstanding plus Treasury equals issued. You can think about it from subtraction as well. If we know how many have been authorized, we know how many have been issued, we know how many have been unissued by subtraction. Same thing if we're given authorized and unissued, we know how many have been issued by subtraction. That's where these two come in. Same idea with the issued, Treasury, and outstanding. That's where these two. With a lot of these equations, you really only need, if any, to memorize one. And then you just got to remember how the others work. Subtracting the same from both sides will keep it the same. So you don't have to remember quite as many equations because it can get confusing for people. American depository receipts. These are sort of weird. We're not going to need to know a lot about them right now. I used to teach them in different areas, but I think they're appropriate right here. But what they are is they are U.S. trading of foreign companies in U.S. dollars. They are issued by U.S. banks. They allow trading of foreign companies. They are purchased and paid for in U.S. dollars. Basically, if I wanted to buy Toyota stock, Toyota trades on the Nikkei in Japan. It doesn't directly trade on the New York Stock Exchange. I could, as a regular retail investor, fly to Japan, convert my dollars into yuan, go and buy the stock on the stock exchange, figure out some place to hold the shares. Whenever they send me dividends, it's in yuan. I've got to convert them. If I want to sell them, I've got to go back to Japan, sell them on the Nikkei. It's a hassle. The way the ADRs work, though, is say some big bank goes and buys 1 million shares of Toyota. What they then do is issue 1 million ADRs, each one representing 1 share of Toyota. So whenever Toyota issues dividends, the bank gets those dividends, converts those dividends into dollars, divides by 1 million, that's how many shares they got dividends worth, and sends that much to each ADR that they've issued. But these are issued by U.S. companies, U.S. banks, to allow the trading of foreign companies. But they trade in U.S. dollars. Foreign companies, but trade in U.S. dollars. That is the end of the common stock unit. I will see you again shortly.